The frontier world was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Its sky burned in hues of violet and silver, and jagged mountains clawed at the clouds like ancient teeth. But beauty here was dangerous. The winds cut sharper than any knife, and at night, the cold was merciless. It seeped into skin, froze bones, and whispered threats that only the lonely and desperate could hear. Daniel Hayes, a human corporal assigned to this distant world, sat on a small outcropping of frozen rock. Around him were soldiers from other worlds, scaled reptiles with golden eyes, feathered bipeds whose wings shivered in the wind, and fur-covered creatures that huddled together like children in fear. They were far from home, far from the warmth of hearths, and far from anyone who could truly understand them. But Daniel, despite being human and seemingly fragile in comparison, had learned to endure. Humans were not the strongest, nor the fastest, but they carried a stubbornness deep in their bones, a fire that refused to die even in the coldest nights. And tonight that fire was tested. The squad's supplies had run dangerously low, rations were meager, water was frozen into blocks that took hours to melt, and warmth, the most basic, vital warmth, was almost gone. Each soldier had been given only a single thin blanket, and most had long since surrendered it to sleep in their armor. But there was one who had nothing. One who trembled visibly as the wind sliced through the camp. Karenni. Karenni was young, barely older than a child by her species' reckoning. Her skin was pale and delicate, her bones thin and fragile, and she shivered uncontrollably even, when pressed against the dying embers of the fire. Her large dark eyes looked out over the frozen land with a mixture of fear and exhaustion, as if she were silently asking the world not to hurt her again. Daniel noticed her trembling hands, the way her teeth clicked in rapid, tiny movements. He saw the slow rise and fall of her chest and wondered how anyone could survive this night without the heat of human ingenuity or some miracle. He wanted to reach out, to cover her, to protect her. But he had nothing. Nothing but the small, thin bedroll that wrapped around his own body. It was frayed at the edges, small and worn from years of use, and it would barely keep a human warm in these conditions. And yet he could not bear the sight of her suffering. The other aliens gave him wary looks. Some could tolerate cold better than others, but even the hardiest among them knew the edge of frostbite was close. No one spoke. No one dared move. The silence of the night pressed in, heavier than the wind, heavier than the snow that drifted across the rocks. It was a silence full of judgment and curiosity, watching to see what the human would do. Daniel didn't hesitate. He rose slowly, muscles stiff and protesting from the cold, and walked toward Karenni. She looked up, startled by the movement. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't. You need it." He shook his head. "You need it more than I do. I'll be fine." He bent and unrolled the bedroll over her small shoulders. It barely reached her knees, but it was enough to cover her trembling body, enough to give her a shield against the freezing air. She tried to protest, to say no, to refuse it, but he would not hear it. His human stubbornness, his unwillingness to see another suffer when he could act, would not allow it. Karenni's eyes glimmered with shock and something else. Gratitude, fear, perhaps disbelief. The alien around the fire looked on, silent, uncertain. Daniel could see the questions forming in their minds. Why would a human give away his only warmth? Why risk himself for another? But Daniel paid no attention. His focus was on the small figure beneath the bedroll, the life he could save with a simple act of selflessness. The wind blew harder, rattling the thin shelter of rocks, and Daniel returned to his post beside the fire. He shivered, but he didn't complain. He watched the young alien curl into the bedroll, slowly stilling her trembling. For the first time that night, her lips relaxed, her eyes softened, and her body seemed to find some small measure of comfort in the human sacrifice. Daniel sat back, hands tucked between his knees, and whispered to himself, "Sleep well, Karenni. You're safe." For the first time in many nights he felt the true weight of what it meant to be human, the choice to act, the courage to give even when it hurts, and the quiet pride in knowing that a simple gesture might make the difference between life and death. As the stars spun slowly across the violet sky, Daniel stared into the darkness. He could not imagine what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that tonight, through a small act of kindness, he had made it better for someone who needed it more than he ever had. And that, he thought, was enough. The night grew darker, and the sear wind howled louder. Daniel could see the stars struggling to shine behind the thick swirls of frost-laden clouds. The fire, once bright and promising, had burned down to glowing embers that flickered weakly, unable to fight the chill. Every breath Daniel took came out as a white mist, and every step he made across the icy ground reminded him that the cold was unrelenting. Karenni remained curled in the bedroll he had given her. She pressed her small body into the fabric as if trying to absorb its warmth with every fiber of her being. Her breaths were shaky but slower now, more even, and Daniel watched her with a mixture of relief and worry. The human had spent nights like this before, cold, hungry, tired, but he had never known the weight of caring for someone else in such conditions. Now, every instinct screamed at him to stay vigilant, to ensure that the fragile alien before him would not succumb to the cold. He looked down at his own thin covering, feeling the frost seep into his bones. His muscles ached, his teeth chattered, and his fingers were numb, but he did not complain. He reminded himself that warmth was not only physical, it was a shield of hope, a promise that someone mattered enough to fight for. Tonight, that promise was for Karenni. The other soldiers watched in silence. They were a mixture of fear and admiration, unsure of how to respond. In their cultures, survival came first. Sacrifice for another was not common, and to risk one's own life for someone else was almost unthinkable. Yet Daniel did not hesitate. To him, the choice had been simple. Survival meant little if it came at the expense of another life. Karenni's eyes met his as she whispered softly, "But I can't take this. You need it more than I do." Daniel shook his head gently. "No. I'll survive. You need this now. That's what matters." His voice was steady, firm, yet gentle. He sat back on the rock, allowing her to settle, feeling the sharp wind bite at his own exposed skin. He ignored the numbness creeping through his body. He ignored the pain in his legs and arms. All that mattered was the small warmth he could give. As the night stretched on, the temperature dropped even further. Frost formed on Daniel's hair and eyelashes, glittering like tiny diamonds in the weak light of the embers. Karenni's small frame shifted slightly, her eyes closing for a moment before opening again. She seemed hesitant, almost afraid to accept the human's gift, but she did, wrapping herself more tightly in the bedroll. Daniel could not help but remember his own past. Nights on Earth during harsh winters when the wind bit through every layer and warmth was a luxury. He had survived through stubbornness and hope. But tonight was different. Tonight, hope meant ensuring another would survive. Tonight, he realized that the fire of humanity was not only in enduring hardship, but in giving what little you had even when it hurt. Time moved slowly. The wind whipped across the rocks with increasing ferocity. Daniel's breath became ragged, but he stayed awake, staring into the darkness. He could see the faint outline of Karenni's form under the bedroll, her small body trembling occasionally, and he felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. Pride because he had done something that mattered, and fear because he knew how fragile life could be in this unforgiving place. Around them, the other aliens finally began to whisper. Some could not understand why a human would give away his only source of warmth. Others nodded subtly, recognizing the courage it took to sacrifice one's own comfort for another. Daniel, oblivious to their murmurs, focused solely on Karenni. She was breathing more steadily now, and a small smile touched her lips, fleeting but real. That smile became a light in Daniel's heart, brighter than the dying fire before them. Hours passed. The cold was relentless, yet Karenni slept. wrapped in the warmth he had given her. Daniel remained awake, shivering, but he felt a sense of purpose that warmed him in a way no blanket ever could. He realized that this was why humans endured, why they survived against impossible odds. They carried empathy in their hearts and courage in their actions. Finally, as the first hints of dawn colored the horizon in soft pink and silver, Daniel allowed himself a moment to rest, leaning back against the rock. He could see Karenni breathing evenly in the bedroll, her small hands tucked beneath her chin. The wind still bit, but he knew that tonight he had made a difference, and sometimes making a difference, no matter how small, was the greatest warmth of all. Daniel whispered to the quiet morning, "Sleep well, Karenni. You'll wake alive, and that's what matters." And for the first time in that long, bitter night, he allowed himself to feel hope. The fire had finally surrendered to the cold. Only a few red embers remained, tiny sparks that flickered weakly in the darkness, offering almost no comfort against the relentless wind. Daniel hugged his knees, wrapping his thin human arms around them, trying to trap the little heat his body could produce. Every joint ached, every breath burned his lungs with icy sharpness. Frost was forming on his hair, eyebrows, and even his eyelashes, and yet he stayed awake. Sleep was dangerous. To sleep meant giving the cold a chance to steal more than warmth. It meant risking life itself. Karenni, wrapped tightly in the bedroll Daniel had given her, slept uneasily. Small tremors ran through her body occasionally, and her breaths came in shallow, careful motions. Daniel watched her, his chest tight with worry. Her species was delicate, more fragile than most humans, and certainly more sensitive to the biting cold of this frontier world. One wrong moment, one lapse of attention, and the night could take her from him. He couldn't allow that. Around them, the other soldiers had either dozed or sat silently, their alien forms barely moving against the wind. Daniel could see them, eyes bright in the dim firelight, watching, judging, unsure of how a human could endure this self-imposed punishment without complaint. But Daniel did not notice them. His focus was entirely on the small life beneath his bedroll, on the warmth he had given her, on the fragile bond that now connected them without words. Minutes stretched into hours. Daniel shifted slightly, adjusting his position, trying to stop his legs from going numb. Each movement sent pain shooting through his frozen muscles, but he ignored it. He reminded himself that this was nothing compared to the danger Karenni faced without the warmth of the bedroll. He had seen frostbite claim soldiers in harsher climates, and he would not allow it to claim her. Not tonight. Not because of indifference or duty, but because of something deeper, a human instinct perhaps to protect life when it could not protect itself. Karenni stirred slightly and opened her eyes. They were large and glimmering in the dim light, reflecting a mixture of fear and surprise. She looked at Daniel, her gaze hesitant, almost questioning why he had given so much for her comfort. She whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind, "Are you okay? You'll freeze too." Daniel shook his head, managing a weak smile. "I'll manage. You need it more than I do. Rest now." His words were simple, almost too simple, but they carried something stronger than explanation. They carried a promise, a human warmth that went beyond flesh. She looked down at the bedroll, then back at him. Her expression conflicted. She seemed to want to protest, to refuse, but she did not. Her small body pressed into the fabric and her eyes slowly closed again. She trusted him, for reasons she could not explain, and Daniel felt a quiet surge of relief and pride. The wind rose suddenly, lashing against them with icy fingers. Daniel instinctively placed his body slightly forward, shielding the bedroll from the sharp gusts. His face stung, his lips blue, but he did not complain. Around them the night seemed endless, filled with the whisper of snow and the groan of frozen rock, and yet Daniel felt a fire inside, a stubborn warmth that refused to die. It was human courage, human endurance, and human care, all wrapped into one. Hours passed. Daniel's limbs had grown stiff beyond recognition. His teeth chattered uncontrollably and his breaths came in shallow, sharp bursts. But when he looked at Karenni curled in the bedroll he had given her, he felt something stronger than his own suffering. He felt purpose. He felt meaning. He realized that this was why humans survived in the harshest places, why they could endure what others could not. It was not just about strength or speed, it was about heart, about refusing to turn away when someone else needed you. Finally, just as the horizon began to glow with the first hints of dawn, a faint warmth began to rise in his chest, not from the air, not from the dying embers, but from the quiet satisfaction of having kept someone alive through sheer determination. Karenni stirred again, blinking slowly as her small body relaxed fully into the bedroll. She was safe. And, for Daniel, that safety was a fire stronger than any flame. He whispered to her in the quiet, frost-bitten dawn, "You're safe now. Sleep well. I've got you." And in that moment, as the stars faded and the world began to wake to another frozen day, Daniel understood something profound. Survival was not always about strength. Sometimes it was about courage, empathy, and the quiet, unwavering act of caring for another life in the face of impossible odds. Tonight, he had lived that truth. Morning broke slowly over the frozen frontier, painting the jagged mountains in soft shades of pink and silver. The wind had calmed somewhat, but the air remained bitter, sharp enough to bite through clothing and armor alike. Daniel rose carefully, muscles stiff and body aching from the night spent in frost and vigilance. Every joint protested, every step was a reminder of the cold he had endured. And yet, there was a quiet satisfaction in him. Karenni had survived. That was all that mattered. The squad moved again, trudging through snow and ice toward the next checkpoint. Supplies were still dangerously low. The landscape was harsh, unwelcoming, and every step forward was a fight against exhaustion, hunger, and the biting cold. Daniel walked near the rear, as always, keeping an eye on Karenni. She walked beside him now, her small frame wrapped tightly in layers of fabric scavenged from the wreckage they had found along the way. Her eyes darted frequently to him, wary and questioning, as if searching for reassurance that the warmth he had given her would remain. Daniel noticed the subtle tension in her posture. She was grateful, yes, but also uneasy. Humans, he realized, had a way of giving that seemed simple to them, but carried great weight for others. In her culture, gifts were not given lightly. Acts of kindness often carried deep meaning, obligations that could not be ignored. And Daniel had given freely, without hesitation, without expectation. That freedom of giving, it was strange, almost impossible for Karenni to fully understand. The march continued, each step heavier than the last. Daniel's body had begun to adapt to the cold, muscles stiff but enduring, mind alert despite fatigue. He noticed the other aliens around them, each battling the harsh climate in their own ways. Some were stoic, hardened by survival instincts. Others were restless, whispering among themselves about the strange human who had given away his only bedroll. Daniel paid them no mind. His attention was fully on Karenni, on keeping her safe, on ensuring that the night's sacrifice had not been in vain. Karenni finally spoke, her voice hesitant and soft. "Daniel, why did you do it? Why give me your only warmth?" He glanced at her, seeing fear, gratitude, and confusion mixed in her wide eyes. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because you needed it. And because I couldn't let you suffer if I could stop it." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to understand a concept that was foreign to her. In her world, survival was personal, individual. Risking oneself for another was rare, often dangerous, and rarely done without expectation. But here was a human, acting purely out of care with no thought for himself. The walk grew harder as the terrain became rougher. The snow deepened, and each step took more effort. Karenni stumbled once, and Daniel caught her by the arm, steadying her with gentle strength. "Careful," he said, voice soft but firm. We moved together, one step at a time. She nodded, gripping his arm tightly, drawing strength from his presence. Daniel could feel the warmth of her small body through the layers of clothing. a reminder that the act of kindness from the night before had forged a subtle connection between them. It was unspoken, yet undeniable, a bond born from trust and care in a world that often offered neither. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, though it offered little warmth. Every soldier in the squad fought through exhaustion and cold, but Daniel noticed something remarkable. Karini was more confident now. She moved with steadier steps, her eyes less fearful, her posture less rigid. The bedroll, the warmth, and the care had given her more than physical comfort. It had given her hope. Daniel felt a quiet pride swell in his chest, but it was tempered by worry. He knew the frontier could turn against them at any moment. Storms could arrive without warning, snow could collapse underfoot, and the cold could creep into their bones faster than any weapon. But as he glanced at Karini, watching her find strength in the warmth he had given, he realized that sometimes courage was not measured by battles won or lost, but by the quiet acts that kept someone alive. For Daniel, this march was more than survival. It was a test of endurance, of empathy, of humanity itself. Every step, every breath, every act of care reminded him, and everyone who watched, that humans were capable of extraordinary things, not through strength or technology alone, but through heart, compassion, and the courage to give without expectation. As they neared the next shelter, Daniel felt a spark of hope. Karini's small hand brushed his accidentally, and he met her eyes. There was something unspoken there, a silent acknowledgement of the night they had endured, and of the quiet bond formed between them. He knew, even if she could not fully express it yet, that she carried a debt, not of obligation, but of gratitude and recognition for the warmth that had kept her alive. And somewhere deep in his chest, Daniel felt that perhaps in this harsh, frozen world, the human heart was one of the strongest forces of all. Night fell again on the frontier, but this time it felt different. The first bitter frost of dawn had passed, leaving the world quiet and still, yet the cold was sharper than ever. Daniel's muscles ached, his fingers stiff and blue, and the thin warmth of the fire was almost laughably small against the wind that cut across the frozen plain. He sat, leaning against a jagged rock, exhausted but alert. The day's march had drained him, yet his mind was only half on the terrain ahead. The other half was on Karini. She moved cautiously among the squad, small and fragile, but determined, her eyes scanning the horizon as if measuring the distance between herself and danger. Daniel noticed the subtle tension in her movements, the careful precision in every step. She had survived the previous night because of him, yet he could tell she was planning something. Her gaze often lingered on him, not with fear this time, but with a quiet intensity he couldn't yet name. Hours passed. The camp was quiet, save for the soft crackle of a meager fire and the occasional whisper of wind. Daniel wrapped his arms around his knees again, trying to push warmth into his frozen body. He knew Karini was near. He could feel it. Then he noticed her approaching slowly, carrying something in her small hands. It glowed faintly, an unusual living warmth that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her breaths. Daniel blinked. "Karini, what is that?" His voice was hoarse, rough from the cold, yet curiosity and surprise shone through. She knelt before him, careful not to spill the warmth she carried. Her large eyes met his, dark and wide, revealing hesitation, fear, and something else, pride perhaps, or courage. Daniel could sense the weight of the gesture before it was even spoken. She placed the glowing object gently in his hands. It was a shard of her people's soul crystal. It radiated heat, far more than the fire could, soft and steady, filling the chill of the night with an almost tangible warmth. Daniel held it, feeling the heat seep into his frozen bones, but this warmth was different. It wasn't just physical. It felt alive. Alive with Karini's spirit, her gratitude, and a bond that no words could capture. She whispered, voice trembling yet firm, "You gave me life when the cold would have taken me. This is for you. It is more than flame. It is more than warmth. It is us." Daniel stared, speechless. He had given her his bedroll, a simple human act of care, expecting nothing in return. And here she was, offering him something far more profound, a piece of her own being. He realized that humans and aliens were different, yet the heart understood heart. Her gift was a bridge, a proof that acts of kindness could transcend species, culture, and fear. Around them, the squad watched in silence. Some looked amazed, others bewildered. In their cultures, soul crystals were sacred, guarded closely, often never given to anyone outside the family. And yet here was Karini, giving away part of herself without hesitation, trusting Daniel completely. That trust, that courage was a rare thing, something Daniel felt in his chest as a warmth far stronger than the cold ever could be. Daniel lifted the crystal closer, studying the faint, pulsing light within it. He could feel Kareni's heartbeat, steady and strong, mingling with his own. It was as if the warmth was not just heat, but connection, a bond that tied them together in a way that words could not express. He finally spoke, voice husky with emotion. "Kareni, I don't know what to say. This is beyond anything I could ever expect." She smiled faintly, a small, almost shy expression, and nodded. "Then do not say anything. Just keep it. Remember that kindness is stronger than fear. Remember that you saved me, and now I give you part of myself." Daniel held the crystal close to his chest. The cold still bit at his exposed skin, but inside his heart burned brighter than any fire. He realized that the night's hardships, the frozen wind, the pain, it had all led to this moment, a moment that proved that courage, empathy, and simple acts of care were stronger than any weapon, more powerful than any survival instinct. And in that quiet frontier night, Daniel understood something extraordinary. Humanity was not just about endurance. Humanity was about giving, about caring, about touching lives in ways that transcended survival. And in Kareni's gift, he saw the warmth of a bond that could outshine any cold, any danger, any hardship. He whispered softly to her, "Thank you for this and for trusting me," and she simply nodded, her small smile glowing as brightly as the soul crystal she had given him. The night air was still, but now it carried a new warmth. Daniel held the soul crystal close to his chest, feeling the steady pulse of life it radiated. The cold wind, which had threatened to steal strength and hope, now seemed powerless against this glow. He could feel it in his bones, a heat far deeper than the fire could provide, a heat born of trust, courage, and gratitude. Kareni sat beside him, small and quiet, her dark eyes reflecting the soft light of the crystal. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax fully. She had given something sacred, something deeply personal, yet she did not fear. Humans, she had come to realize, were strange beings. They could endure pain, hunger, and cold, yet they could also give freely, without hesitation, without thought for their own survival. It was a paradox, and yet she had learned to trust it. Daniel turned the crystal slowly in his hands, marveling at its warmth and the life he felt within it. It was not just heat, it was connection, almost a voice whispering of Kareni's courage, of her gratitude, of the bond that now tied them together. Every heartbeat, every pulse of the crystal reminded him that even in this frozen, distant world, kindness could survive. And not only survive, it could thrive. The other soldiers watched in quiet awe. They had heard of humans' acts of courage, but this was different. This was not a battle or a mission. This was a quiet, intimate moment of connection between species, a human showing care without expectation, and an alien responding with trust beyond imagination. Some whispered to each other, trying to comprehend the gesture, while others simply stared, understanding instinctively that what they had witnessed was extraordinary. Daniel looked up at Kareni. "I don't know how to repay you," he said, softly. His voice carried awe, gratitude, and something deeper, humility. He had given his bedroll freely, But the gift he now held surpassed anything he could have imagined. It was more than warmth. It was a reminder that life, courage, and trust were intertwined in ways he had never fully realized. Karenni shook her head, a faint smile curving her lips. You don't need to repay anything. That was not why I gave it. You saved me. That is enough. But I wanted you to feel what you gave me. Not just warmth, but hope, life, strength. Everything you gave me, I return to you now, in a way you can feel. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He could not remember ever receiving anything so profound, so personal, so sacred. The glow of the crystal warmed his hands, his chest, and even his heart. The cold that had pressed against him for so long felt distant now, almost meaningless. In its place was a fire he could not extinguish, a fire that spoke of courage, empathy, and the simple, yet extraordinary power of human kindness. He realized something deeply human. Strength was not just in fighting, surviving, or enduring. Strength could be measured in giving what little you had to someone else. Strength could be measured in trust, in the courage to risk oneself for another's safety, and in the willingness to believe that kindness could exist, even in a harsh world. Karenni's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. The warmth is not just in the crystal, she whispered. It is in the choice to care. You taught me that, Daniel. You gave me life when the world offered only death. I give this to you now, but more than that, I give my respect, my trust, my heart in the form I know, feel it. Let it remind you that you are not alone, and that even in the coldest night, kindness will burn brighter than flame. Daniel clutched the crystal tighter, closing his eyes for a moment. He could feel her essence within it, her spirit intertwined with his own. The warmth spread through him, through his frozen limbs, through his aching muscles, and even deeper into his heart. He realized in that quiet frontier night that he had been given something greater than life itself, a connection that no storm, no frost, no battle could ever destroy. Around the dying embers of the fire, the squad remained silent. None dared speak, for words felt insufficient. They had seen a gift beyond measure, an act that transcended survival, culture, and expectation. They had witnessed humanity at its finest, simple, selfless, extraordinary. And as the cold night lingered around them, Daniel understood fully that the warmth Karenni had given him was stronger than any flame. It was trust, courage, and heart combined, a living reminder that humans could inspire even the most fragile beings to return kindness in ways the universe itself could never measure. He whispered softly to her, "Thank you for showing me something I will never forget." Karenni only nodded, her eyes shining, and for the first time they both felt that the harsh frontier was not a place of despair, but a place where courage and warmth could survive, and perhaps even thrive.